There are some who consider our planet to be a miracle in the universe. The air we breathe and the water which sustains us forms a perfectly balanced ecosystem that supports a multitude of life forms. The rare Earth hypothesis, posed by Peter Ward, a geologist and paleontologist, and Donald E. Brownlee, an astronomer and astrobiologist, in a book published in 2000, suggests that much of the known universe, including large parts of our galaxy, cannot support complex life. To Ward and Brownlee, the Earth is an ecosystem that relies on a host of fortuitous circumstances. Frequently, this delicate balance is disturbed, and the effects are disastrous and long-lasting. My name is Jonathan Lupo. I am the head of experience design for EPAM, a global product development and service design company. I invite you to join me now as we discover how brand ecosystems mirror ecosystems in nature. Designers today are evolving, using a wider aperture and evaluating each interaction with a brand in these connected business ecosystems, much like the complex web of life on Earth. And just like the disasters that disrupt natural ecologies, upsetting this balance in a business context can have a long-lasting impact on a brand. In the 1930s, harbor porpoises were a common sight in the San Francisco Bay. These animals are smaller than their dolphin cousins, about 5 feet long with dark gray backs. Harbor porpoises would spin around wildly in the bay, feeding on herring and anchovies. Observers often referred to them as puffing pigs because of the sounds they make when they breathe. They were a thriving population in the bay. But something happened around World War II, and harbor porpoises suddenly disappeared from the bay. Experts are not quite sure whether it was a single event or a combination of events that caused this disappearance. You see, the bay was a busy wartime port, having as many as 14 warships sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge at once. But during that period, there were many other changes happening under the water. The Navy strung a 7-mile net with explosive mines under the water in the bay to keep out Japanese submarines. Additionally, the bay was a crowded shipping lane, so all of these factors combined surely had an impact on the harbor porpoise population. Some experts think, however, that the largest contributing factor to the decline of the harbor porpoise population in the San Francisco Bay was the quality of the water. As the region boomed, so did the water pollution. Nothing was more devastating to these magnificent creatures than the oil, gas, and garbage which invaded the waters in which they lived. Water pollution was the likely culprit that upset the perfectly balanced ecosystem for the harbor porpoise. Fortunately, this story ends on a positive note. After the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, the quality of the water slowly started to improve in the bay. But it was not an immediate fix to the situation, and it took generations of porpoises, about 40 years in total, to return to the bay. According to experts, the bay, as a habitat, simply disappeared from the institutional memory of generations of harbor porpoises. Luckily today, there's hundreds of harbor porpoises thriving in the bay. From their perspective, the bay as an ecosystem has returned to a state of equilibrium once again. Interconnected ecosystems are balanced because of the interactions amongst inhabitants and their environment. When one inhabitant dominates or upsets the balance, as illustrated in the story of the harbor porpoise, the impact can take decades to recover from. Additionally, a solution doesn't happen on its own. It requires willful intervention. It requires a group of people to recognize that there is a problem to which a solution must be designed. Sometimes an ecosystem is thrown off balance by a devastating accident. Many of you will remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill of 1989 in the Prince William Sound, when an Exxon oil tanker spilled up to 38 million gallons of crude oil in the Sound. Both the short-term and the long-term effects of this oil spill, this devastating disaster, have been studied. Effects include the deaths of countless number of fish, about 250,000 seabirds, 3,000 otters, 247 bald eagles, and 22 orcas. While some of the species have recovered, some fear that the orca population will never fully recover from this disaster in which this ecosystem was thrown off balance. Just like ecosystems in nature, business ecosystems thrive on equilibrium. In a business context, equilibrium is the balanced exchange of value between actors, an enterprise, and a brand. Designers today must now consider the value exchange between the customer and agents of the business, the exchange of value between the business and its employees, and obviously the customer and touch points to the business. If you are a customer advocate, as most of us are, especially those of us who call ourselves UX designers, you may refer to this as the age of the customer. And indeed, the customer is extremely important in a business ecosystem. The danger in the age of the customer is, however, a tendency to overemphasize the customer and neglect the other actors in the ecosystem, which poses a threat and a potential imbalance to the business ecosystem. Remember what happens when one organism dominates in a natural ecosystem? So the business surely depends on the customer for survival. However, a brand's energy needs to permeate all corners of the ecosystem. The brand's promise creates the environment in which all actors transact with a business, much like the life-giving waters of the San Francisco Bay to the harbor porpoise. But the brand's promise loses its ability to sustain the ecosystem when it does not provide meaning to all who depend on it. Here are a few examples of brand promises from a few famous brands and the potential issues that may arise when that promise isn't delivered consistently to all actors in the brand ecosystem. Geico. 15 minutes or less can save you 15% or more on car insurance. With a statement like that, it is the quick delivery of value in every transaction, which should be a key measurement of every interaction in Geico's ecosystem. If that business fails to deliver a prompt response to a consumer inquiry or interaction, they've essentially failed to deliver on their brand promise. Once exposed, that failure, like a toxin in the water of a natural ecosystem, can have a devastating and long-lasting impact on the Geico brand. Coca-Cola. To inspire moments of optimism and uplift, Coke is trying to capture a lifestyle that inspires feelings of happiness and optimism. This general positivity should be felt with every interaction with the business, including interactions between Coca-Cola employees and their managers. Imagine being a Coca-Cola employee and being treated disrespectfully by your manager who doesn't understand or fails to live up to Coke's brand promise. This value proposition would instantly feel shallow and devoid of value to that employee, who may then feel resentment towards customers, who in that employee's assessment may be the ones to whom the promise is solely directed. An employee who resents his customers isn't likely to inspire moments of optimism. Nike, to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world. Nike is also creating a lifestyle instead of focusing on products when articulating their promise. This broadening of value enables them to use inspiration and innovation as measures of experiences that they create within their ecosystem. If you close your eyes and imagine walking into a Nike store or corporate office, you might imagine passing healthy, culturally diverse, and energetic agents of the business. Similarly, the physical displays and equipment used to promote product would feel modern and use the latest technology to illustrate that their product is most effective at improving the performance of the athlete. Anything less than what you just imagined is not worthy of the Nike brand and lifestyle. So, imbalance occurs when the business fails to deliver on their promise in every context, period. Thus, the designer of an ecosystem has much to consider when designing a holistic brand experience. Imagine if a company like Disney created a new theme park, let's call it Awesome Land, in which the entire experience lived up to Disney's value proposition, which is simply magic, but then outsourced the reservation system for the booking of a trip to Awesome Land to a third party. Let's say, in this hypothetical example, that the experience of booking a trip to Awesome Land was not so awesome or magical. In fact, let's say it was awful. A customer doesn't care that Disney outsourced this interaction. The customer, who may not realize that Disney was not responsible for the reservation process, equates Disney with magic. So an experience that isn't magical exposes the man behind the curtain, like a magician who has inadvertently botched his trick. Magic is exposed as trickery. To a consumer, a lack of balance in a business ecosystem is simply interpreted as poor service and can have a long-term, devastating effect on a brand. This is especially true given the adoption of social media as a very public means of exposing a brand's service issues. Everyone, including customers, employees, and the media, are watching how brands deliver their value and are poised to expose service issues in an instantaneous and extremely public way via social channels. Designing equilibrium in a business ecosystem requires designers to attach a wider aperture lens to their view of business. The question is, does this holistic lens require a new tool or skill set for the business-minded designer? Actually, visualizing the business ecosystem of interactions is not a new concept. Luckily, Lynn Shostak introduced a tool to assist with that task. She calls it service blueprinting, and it is a way to visualize and integrate material components, which are products, and immaterial components, which are services of a business. Her technique was highlighted in a Harvard Business Review article way back in 1984. So surely this tool would serve to widen the aperture with which businesses analyze their services. Oddly, however, businesses continue to organize into product silos, indicating that the concept and discipline of service blueprinting is still not a common practice. And the question is why? We need only look at nature to see the benefits of taking a holistic look at an ecosystem and the perils of not doing so. Let's consider for a moment the role of the user experience designer, who is typically charged with understanding the needs, motivations, and pain points of the end user in order to design an engaging and intuitive experience. Although the UX designer today is responsible for the user journey, meaning the way in which an application will likely be used in various contexts and endpoints, that journey usually pertains to only a single actor's interaction with a single product. So, are we suggesting that now the UX designer be focused on the total value of a brand delivered across an ecosystem of interactions? Given the spectrum of actors, experiences, interactions, and contexts, it would seem like too much for one designer, even a team of UX designers, to deal with. Instead, I am proposing an alternative method for dealing with the problem. Let's consider a bifurcation of the discipline of design and an opportunity for each of us to join one of two very important teams. In essence, we could choose to be either product designers focused on problems inherent in individual points of engagement, or service designers who look at ecosystems. Both of these roles are extremely important, and arguably, some of us want to do both. But make no mistake, these are two very different disciplines with their own distinct methods. The product designer in 2015 is an individual who is adept at capturing the vision of her client or stakeholder and vetting that vision against what she knows about the needs of her end users and the trends in the market. Armed with that vision and understanding, she is able to prioritize features that comprise this blue sky vision into a manageable, minimum viable product and a roadmap of enhancements based on qualitative and quantitative feedback from her customers. The service designer in 2015 is an individual who documents everything he knows about the total value that the business is delivering across every channel and interaction in the ecosystem. He calls this value, whether delivered tangibly via product or intangibly via service, the service. He begins by understanding the brand and its promise to the market. He then uses that promise to evaluate every interaction across the entire ecosystem to ensure that the value is being consistently delivered. He designs for balance. He designs for consistency. The service designer doesn't design moments of truth. He designs equilibrium. Let's talk about how products become services. You see, products imply tangible value and discrete experiences. Services, on the other hand, imply intangible value and multi-context connected experiences. In the age of digital engagement, where value can be delivered to a multitude of endpoints across a multitude of contexts, it is important to understand that companies who are used to delivering products must now figure out how to deliver a holistic service by creating connections and intelligence. But what is the connective tissue which binds interactions together in the business ecosystem? Well, we've already discussed how a brand's promise is a measure of consistency of interactions across the ecosystem, ensuring that enterprise values are being consistently delivered. But there has to be something more tangible, more concrete, which provides an actual connection between customers, contexts, and brands. That connective tissue is, of course, data. Luckily, we live in an age in which data is in no short supply. But data, in of itself, isn't actionable. Meaningful data requires a model. When we visualize a business ecosystem, we begin with a conceptual map of the business. What I mean is, we develop a model that represents each phase of the business, in most cases from the customer's vantage point. I call this the engagement model of the business because it outlines each phase when people engage with the brand. Every industry and every business has a unique engagement model. Here are a few examples. Remember, these are only high level. The life cycle of the customer in an e-commerce context is quite an easy one to start with because it begins with how customers find products, evaluate products, and make a purchase, as well as get rewarded for their frequent patronage, which is loyalty. Those of us who have worked with healthcare clients and services are also quite familiar with the continuum of care, or the patient care timeline, beginning with the experience of symptoms, the seeking of medical attention, diagnosing the problem, the evaluation, prescribing, and administration of a treatment, and remaining compliant with treatment, which is basically maintaining wellness or staying healthy. Every business and every industry has an engagement model, which may be used as the framework for their service phases, as well as a way to contextualize the data that the business collects in terms of identifying, benchmarking, and watching key performance indicators that align with each service phase. When doing that deep dive, however, when designing customer journeys and ecosystems, you may begin hearing designers talk about context of use. Context is a key dimension to understanding behavior and designing experiences to support behavior, but it is often described as physical location where brand interactions happen. And although physical location is indeed important to context, context also refers to where actors are within the engagement cycle of a brand. So, we begin by dividing the stage into the high-level phases of engagement. For the purpose of this presentation, I've created an oversimplified version of an e-commerce cycle. Let's say discover, shop, purchase, and loyalty. Next, let's layer in all relevant interactions to a particular service. Of course, there'd be more than what I'm showing, but you get the point. For the UX designer, the focus here is squarely on the customer, examining each interaction by understanding their expectations, their behavior, and potential frustrations. While the service designer, on the other hand, includes all of the other actors in the ecosystem, as well as the very thing that creates expectations in the first place, namely the brand's promise. Next, I'd like to walk you through a real example of how EPAM helped a biotechnology company design a service with the ambitious goal of reinventing how healthcare is done. I can't reveal the name of the company we are doing this for, but I can present the high-level concepts and the process that we followed to design their ecosystem. Earlier, I discussed how data is a key connective tissue that binds products into a service. EPAM has just partnered with a biotechnology company to take this concept one step further. The service we are helping to create takes inspiration from the innovative research at the Weill Medical College at Cornell University, specifically with their work visualizing biological data in 3D using their medical cave. This new service will provide a holistic assessment of an individual's health by aggregating all of their biological data in addition to sequencing their whole genome. Additionally, this service will provide data analysis via clinicians skilled in genomics and education through a combination of human interaction and digital experiences. It's truly a one-of-a-kind service, and to ensure that it will be successful, we started by examining the entire ecosystem. The first step was to understand how this service was going to work and to create a framework for the business. I began by mapping the phases of access, aggregation, and synthesis of data. Mapping the data flow was critical for this type of service. Data collection included self-reported data, which is your health history and family medical history, as well as collected data, which is genome sequencing, radiology imaging, such as full-body MRI, and lab-based data, including metabolomics, which is your small molecule biochemistry, and microbiomics, which is bacteria and living organisms in your gut and skin. Data is collected and distributed to many different touch points to the business, and this is done via the web, a physical clinic, labs, and native apps. Each touch point was designed to consistently express key brand attributes, so the brand promise and data were indeed the connective tissue to bind discrete experiences into a holistic, connected service. After the ecosystem of interactions was mapped at a very high level, we took a deep dive and analyzed the customer journey in detail to understand what were the key tasks, needs, motivations, and pain points of the end user, of the patient. Understanding that the goal was to design equilibrium, however, viewing the ecosystem from the perspective of the customer was not enough. We would need to examine the ecosystem from the vantage point of other actors as well. To that end, we used Lynn Shostak's Service Blueprint as a collaborative tool to discuss, document, and identify imbalances in the entire service ecosystem. Attaching this wide aperture lens revealed surprising insights. For instance, we learned that there would be long periods of time between interactions, which could be opportunities for the service to re-engage with the customer. You see, service design is also about the white space between interactions. That white space provides fertile ground for innovative ways to engage customers. Additionally, we analyzed the clinician's view of the service, uncovering opportunities to better empower them with tools to communicate with their patients. When it came to designing products for the service, we identified experience principles to help guide the effort. The stakeholder, for instance, didn't want to insult the intelligence of the consumer, so they felt very strongly about including as much data as possible in each product experience. And this was done to help educate the consumer about their bodies, as well as about genomics in general as a study, and what genomics could tell them about their bodies. Next, as this was a truly one-of-a-kind service, it had to feel that way. Our client wanted experiences that didn't feel like traditional websites or apps. Another guiding principle was that any digital representation of the end user, of the patient, it couldn't feel like medical clip art. What I mean by that was it had to feel uniquely them. After all, we were collecting all of their biological data, so that they could be recreated digitally in 3D and with scientific accuracy. Our design team was extremely lucky that our client had such clarity of vision. It made the job of creating experiences that captured the brand promise a very easy task. The hard part was trying to understand the science behind the service, but that's another story. To conclude, equilibrium in a business ecosystem is the balanced exchange of value between actors, the enterprise, and a brand. Interactions need to be assessed in terms of whether each actor's expectations are set via the brand promise and met consistently across the ecosystem. That continuity, that familiarity, that connection is what makes a bunch of discrete products a service. That consistency is what creates equilibrium. Thank you so much for your time today. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.